The divorce papers hit Elena's face before she could blink. Marcus Ashford stood over his wife in the Manhattan courthouse hallway, his $3,000 shoes inches from her fallen purse, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "Sign it, you worthless nobody. Sign it and crawl back to whatever trailer park I found you in." Elena didn't wipe the tears. She didn't pick up the papers scattered at her feet. She just looked at her watch. 10:00 a.m. Exactly on time. Because Marcus Ashford wasn't divorcing a broke housewife from Oregon. He was declaring war on a family that had destroyed empires before breakfast. And they had just pulled up outside. Comment your city below. Let me know how far this story travels. The papers hit her face with a sharp slap. Elena Ashford stood frozen in the courthouse hallway as the thick stack of legal documents scattered across the marble floor at her feet. One page landed face up, showing her name next to the word defendant in bold black letters. Marcus Ashford towered over her, his Italian suit perfectly pressed, his Rolex catching the morning light. He looked like a magazine cover. He smiled like a predator. "Pick them up." Elena didn't move. "I said pick them up, Elena." Her hands trembled at her sides. 18 years. 18 years of marriage, and this is how it ended. In a courthouse hallway, being treated like garbage in front of strangers. "Marcus, please, can we just talk about this?" "The children." "The children are grown. They don't need you. Nobody needs you." Marcus stepped closer, his expensive cologne mixing with the cold courthouse air. "You were useful once. You're not useful anymore." A young court clerk walked past, eyes down, pretending not to see. An older woman on a bench watched with her mouth open. Marcus didn't care. He never cared who was watching. 18 years, Marcus," Elena's voice cracked. "I gave up everything for you, my family, my home, You're nothing." Marcus laughed and the sound bounced off the high ceilings like broken glass. "You gave up nothing because you had nothing. I picked you up from a dying town in the middle of nowhere, Oregon. I gave you a life. I gave you penthouses and cars and clothes that cost more than your childhood home." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "And you couldn't even give me a son who wasn't a disappointment." Elena flinched like he'd hit her. Their son Michael was a kind, gentle young man who wanted to be a teacher. Marcus had never forgiven him for not wanting the company. "Don't you dare talk about Michael." "I'll talk about whatever I want. I paid for everything. Your clothes, your food, your pathetic little charity work that made you feel important." Marcus straightened his tie, his smirk widening. "But here's the good news, Elena. Today you sign those papers. You agree to nothing. No alimony, no assets, no claims. And you walk away before I make this really ugly." "You can't do that. The law..." "The law." Marcus laughed again. "Arthur." A thin man in a gray suit appeared from around the corner, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's cars. Arthur Blackwood, the lawyer they called the executioner in Manhattan legal circles. He had never lost a divorce case, not once in 30 years. "Mrs. Ashford." Arthur nodded at Elena with the warmth of a morgue drawer. "My client's offer is generous. Sign the waiver, agree to the non-disclosure agreement, and you can leave New York with your dignity intact. Refuse, and we will expose every piece of information we have gathered about your activities." Activities? Elena's confusion was genuine. "What activities? I've never done anything." "That's not what the witnesses will say." Arthur opened his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "We have statements from hotel staff, credit card receipts, photographs." "Photographs of what?" "Of you, Mrs. Ashford, with other men." Elena's face went white. "That's impossible. I've never..." "It doesn't matter what you've done." Marcus took the folder from Arthur and waved it in her face. "It matters what we can prove. And trust me, sweetheart, by the time Arthur is done, every newspaper in New York will know you're a cheating, gold-digging tramp who married above her station." "I wasn't unfaithful. Not once. Not ever." "Your word against mine. And honey..." Marcus patted her cheek hard enough to sting. Nobody believes the poor little nobody from Oregon. Not against Marcus Ashford. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the papers on the floor, at the folder full of lies, at the husband who had become a stranger. I need time to think. You have until we walk into that courtroom. Which is, Marcus checked his Rolex. 45 minutes. I suggest you use them wisely. He turned and walked away, Arthur following like a loyal dog. Their shoes clicked on the marble, echoing down the hall, until they disappeared around the corner. Elena stood alone. She should pick up the papers. She should find a bathroom and cry. She should call her daughter, her son, anyone who might still care about her. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small device. It looked like a pager, the kind hospitals used 20 years ago, old-fashioned, almost ridiculous. But when it buzzed in her hand, 3 short pulses, then one long, Elena's entire posture changed. She wiped her eyes. She squared her shoulders. She took a breath so deep it seemed to fill her entire body with something that hadn't been there before. Resolve. Elena looked at the scattered papers one more time. Then she stepped over them and walked toward the courtroom. She didn't look back. The courtroom smelled like old wood and new money. Elena walked in and immediately felt every eye turn toward her. The gallery was half full reporters Marcus had tipped off, she realized. He wanted witnesses for her humiliation. He wanted tomorrow's headlines to read, "Tech CEO divorces cheating wife," with her picture looking broken and beaten. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Not today. Elena took her seat at the defendant's table, where a young man in a rumpled suit was already waiting. He stood up so fast, he knocked over his coffee cup. "Mrs. Ashford." "Oh God, I'm so sorry about the coffee. I'm Timothy Chen, your court-appointed attorney, and I have to be honest with you." "Sit down, Timothy. This case is extremely difficult, and I really think we should consider—" "Timothy." Elena's voice was calm, steady. "Sit down." He sat. Elena looked at him for the first time. He was young, maybe 28, with the nervous energy of someone who had graduated law school recently enough to still believe in justice. His suit was cheap but clean. His eyes were kind but terrified. "You seem scared," Elena said. "I am scared, Mrs. Ashford. That's Arthur Blackwood over there. He's destroyed people with 10 times our resources. He has evidence. Fabricated evidence. Maybe, but we can't prove that. And he has witnesses who will say anything for money. And your husband—" Timothy lowered his voice. "Your husband is one of the richest men in New York. We have nothing." Elena looked across the aisle. Marcus sat with Arthur and 2 other lawyers, all of them in matching expensive suits. They were laughing about something. Probably her. Marcus caught her eye and mouthed the word, "Goodbye." Elena didn't flinch. She just held his gaze until he looked away. "Mrs. Ashford," Timothy whispered. "Did you hear what I said? We have nothing." "No, Timothy." Elena turned back to him, and something in her eyes made him stop talking. "We don't have nothing. We have the truth. And sometimes that's enough. With all due respect, ma'am, the truth doesn't win cases. Money wins cases. Power wins cases." Elena almost smiled. Almost. "We'll see." The bailiff called the court to order as Judge Harold Brennan entered. He was an older man, mid-60s, with the exhausted expression of someone who had seen too many rich people destroy each other in his courtroom. He settled into his chair and flipped through a file. "Case number 847D, Ashford versus Ashford. Mr. Blackwood, you may begin." Arthur stood up, buttoning his jacket with practiced smoothness. He walked toward the bench like a king approaching his throne. "Your Honor, we are here today to dissolve a marriage that should never have existed." Elena felt the words like a knife, but she didn't move. "My client Marcus Ashford is a self-made man, a titan of American industry. He built Ashford Technologies from nothing. Nothing." Elena thought. Nothing except my ideas, my support, my 18 years of pretending I didn't exist. And he made the mistake of marrying a woman who was frankly beneath him. Marcus nodded gravely, playing the role of noble victim. Mrs. Elena Ashford, née Elena James, came from a small town in Oregon. No education to speak of. No family of note. No prospects. My client in his generosity gave her a life of luxury beyond her wildest dreams. Arthur paused for effect, turning to face the gallery of reporters. And how did she repay him with laziness, with incompetence, and ultimately with infidelity? Gasps rippled through the gallery. Elena saw reporters scribbling furiously. "We have evidence, Your Honor." Arthur held up the manila folder. Witness statements, photographs, hotel receipts. While my client was working 18-hour days to build an empire, his wife was entertaining other men. Elena stood up. "That's a lie." "Sit down, Mrs. Ashford." Judge Brennan's voice was tired. "You'll have your turn." Elena sat, her heart pounding. "Given the defendant's adultery," Arthur continued smoothly, "we are seeking a full dissolution of the marriage with no alimony, no asset division, and immediate removal from the marital residence. Furthermore, we are suing for defamation based on false statements the defendant has made about my client's character." He sat down, brushing invisible lint from his sleeve. Judge Brennan looked at Elena's table. "Mr. Chen, your response." Timothy stood up. His knees were visibly shaking. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Ashford has been a loyal and faithful wife for 18 years. These accusations are completely..." Objection. Arthur didn't even stand up. "Counsel is characterizing without evidence." Sustained. Mr. Chen, stick to facts. Timothy swallowed hard. The defense reserves the right to cross-examine witnesses and, for God's sake." Arthur shook his head with theatrical disappointment. "Your Honor, the defense clearly has no case. Mrs. Ashford has no character witnesses, no family to vouch for her, no resources to challenge our evidence. She is, with all due respect, a woman with nothing." Marcus leaned over to whisper something to Arthur. They both laughed. Elena watched them. She watched her husband of 18 years laugh at her destruction. She watched the reporters prepare to write stories about her humiliation. She watched poor Timothy Chen tremble in his cheap suit. And she felt the pager buzz in her purse again. One long pulse, then three short. They were here. Elena stood up. "Your Honor, I need to make a statement." Judge Brennan frowned. "Mrs. Ashford, your lawyer speaks for you." "My lawyer has done an admirable job given the circumstances." Elena's voice had changed. It wasn't the trembling voice of a beaten woman. It was something else, something stronger. "But I believe there's been a misunderstanding about my circumstances." Arthur rolled his eyes. "Your Honor, this is clearly a delay tactic." "I'm not delaying anything, Mr. Blackwood." Elena turned to face him. "I'm correcting an error. You called me a woman with nothing. No family, no resources, no power." She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "You were wrong." Marcus stood up. "Elena, what the hell are you?" Boom! The courtroom doors slammed open with enough force to shake the windows. Every head turned. 6 men entered first. They wore black tactical suits fitted perfectly with earpieces coiling down their necks. They moved like soldiers. No, they moved like men who had been soldiers once and had become something more dangerous since. They positioned themselves on either side of the entrance, creating a corridor. Then the real entrance began. An older man walked through first. He was perhaps 70, with silver hair swept back from a face that belonged on currency. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most houses, and he carried a silver-tipped cane, not because he needed it, but because it made him look like the kind of man who could end careers with a phone call. Which he could, which he had, many times. Beside him walked a woman in her early 40s, stunning and sharp-featured, wearing a white suit that looked like armor. She carried a leather briefcase stamped with a gold crest, a lion holding a sword. Behind them came a wall of lawyers. Not the rumpled, nervous lawyers of public courts. These were the lawyers who handled international treaties and royal divorces and corporate wars that never made the newspapers because they ended before anyone knew they had started. There were 12 of them. "What is the meaning of this?" Judge Brennan demanded, though his voice had lost some of its authority. "You cannot simply barge into my courtroom." The silver-haired man stopped in the center of the aisle. He looked at the judge. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Arthur Blackwood, who had suddenly gone very pale. "My apologies, Your Honor." The man's voice was deep and smooth and absolutely certain. "We were delayed by traffic. I am Richard Castellano." Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Arthur Blackwood's briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a thud that echoed through the room. Richard Castellano. The Richard Castellano. The man who owned shipping lanes and media empires, and according to some whispered rumors, significant portions of the United States Senate. The Castellanos weren't just rich. They were the foundation upon which American wealth was built. Old money, real money, the kind of money that made billionaires look like street vendors. The industrialist, Arthur managed to stammer. Among other things, Richard's cold blue eyes fixed on him like crosshairs on a target. "And I," said the woman in white, stepping forward, "am Victoria Castellano Hughes, senior partner at Hughes Morrison and Associates." Arthur made a sound like a wounded animal. Hughes Morrison and Associates, the law firm that handled the affairs of nations. The firm that had never lost a case because their opponents usually surrendered before trial to preserve what little they had left. "We are here representing the defendant," Richard said. He turned to look at Elena, and his cold expression melted into something warm, something tender, something that looked remarkably like love. "Hello, sweetheart." Elena walked out from behind her table. She passed the stunned Timothy Chen. She walked to the silver-haired man who had just paralyzed a courtroom, and she hugged him. "Hi, Dad." Marcus Ashford made a sound. It started as a word, maybe what or how, but it came out as a strangled noise that didn't sound human. "That's impossible." He was on his feet, pointing at Elena like she had transformed into a monster. "You're Elena James. You're from Oregon. Your family runs a hardware store. I told you my family was difficult." Elena stepped back from her father's embrace and turned to face her husband. "I told you I was estranged from them because I wanted a different life. Both of those things were true. But my mother's maiden name was James. I used it when I left for college because I wanted to see if anyone could love me for me." Elena's voice was steady now, certain. "Not for my bank account. Not for my connections. Not for my last name." Richard Castellano stepped forward, his cane tapping on the courtroom floor. "We gave her 20 years, Mr. Ashford. 20 years to live a normal life. To find a man who loved her, not her inheritance. To see if such a man existed." He stopped directly in front of Marcus, who had gone so pale he looked like a wax figure. "She thought she found that man in you." Victoria opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. 20 years ago," Victoria said, "our sister authorized an investment in your startup through a shell corporation called Blue Harbor Holdings. She believed in your vision. More importantly, she believed in you." Marcus shook his head. "Blue Harbor. That was an angel investment group from the Castellano Family Trust." Victoria handed a document to the bailiff. "Elena owns 47% of Ashford Technologies through various holding companies. Our family trust owns an additional 5%. She smiled, and it was the smile of a shark smelling blood. "That's 52%, Mr. Ashford. A controlling interest." Marcus grabbed the edge of his table like a man trying not to drown. "You're lying. The shares are in my name. I built that company." With my money, Elena said quietly, and my patience, and my ideas which you took credit for, and my connections which you never knew about. She walked toward him slowly, and with each step she seemed to grow taller, stronger, more terrifying. I'm not just your wife, Marcus. I'm your majority shareholder. I'm your board member. And as of this moment, she stopped directly in front of him. I'm your boss. Arthur Blackwood found his voice, though it came out thin and reedy. Your Honor, this is clearly some kind of fraud. The defendant is attempting to confuse the court with Mr. Blackwood. Richard Castellano's voice cut through the room like a blade. I would advise you to stop speaking. Every word you say is being recorded, and our legal team has already documented 17 instances of witness tampering and evidence fabrication in your preparation for this case. Arthur's mouth opened and closed like a fish. 17, Richard repeated. That's enough for disbarment, possibly prison, though I suspect the prison part depends entirely on how the next 5 minutes go. Judge Brennan banged his gavel, though the sound seemed smaller now. This is highly irregular. Mr. Castellano, while I respect your position, you cannot simply take over these proceedings. Ms. Castellano Hughes, you would need to file an appearance. Already filed electronically, Your Honor. Victoria held up her tablet. 12 minutes ago, along with a motion to transfer this case to the Federal District Court, given the complexity of the assets involved and the evidence of criminal fraud committed by the plaintiff. Criminal fraud. Marcus's voice cracked. I haven't committed any. The penthouse renovation billed as server upgrades. Elena listed them on her fingers. The company jet trips to Monaco billed as client development. The jewelry for Jessica. How do you know about Jessica? Elena smiled sadly. I've known about Jessica for 3 years, Marcus. I've known about all of them. Sophie before her, Amanda before that. I was hoping you would change. I was hoping the man I married was still in there somewhere. She shook her head. He wasn't. Victoria handed another document to the bailiff. This is a court order freezing all assets of Ashford Technologies pending investigation. This is a subpoena for Mr. Ashford's personal financial records. And this... She pulled out one final paper. This is an eviction notice for the penthouse on Park Avenue. The building is owned by Castellano Real Estate. Mr. Ashford has 24 hours to vacate. You can't do this? Marcus screamed. That's my home. It was never your home. Elena's voice was quiet, but carried through the room. It was mine. I just let you live there. Marcus looked around desperately, at his lawyers, who were packing up their things, at the reporters, who were now typing frantically, at the judge, who had removed his glasses and was rubbing his eyes. Finally, he looked at Elena, his wife, the woman he had thrown papers at this morning, the woman he had called worthless, the woman he had planned to destroy. She stood surrounded by her father, her sister, and an army of lawyers. She stood with her shoulders straight and her eyes clear. She stood like a queen who had finally reclaimed her throne. Sarah. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. Please. We can work this out. I love you. I've always loved you. Elena tilted her head, studying him like he was a stain on an expensive carpet. My name, she said slowly, is Elena Castellano. And you never loved me, Marcus. You loved the idea that you were better than me, that you had rescued some poor little nobody from Oregon, that you had all the power. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow echoed through the silent room. But you never had the power, Marcus. I did. I just chose not to use it. She straightened up. I'm choosing differently now. Elena turned and walked toward the courtroom doors. Her father followed, then her sister, then the wall of lawyers. The bodyguards fell into formation behind them. This court will take a 2-hour recess, Judge Brennan said weakly. Mr. Ashford, I strongly suggest you find new legal counsel. Mr. Blackwood appears to be indisposed. Arthur Blackwood had slumped into his chair, staring at nothing. Marcus stood alone at his table as the courtroom emptied around him. The reporters were rushing out to file their stories. The bailiff was gathering papers. Even his own legal team had abandoned him. He looked at the empty space where Elena had stood. 20 years. 20 years of marriage, and he had never known who she really was. He had mocked her family's hardware store. He had laughed at her small-town roots. He had treated her like a servant because he thought she had no choice. And now he had nothing. His phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. "Saw the news. Don't call me." Marcus Ashford sank into his chair and for the first time in years began to cry. But there was no one left to see it. No, Marcus didn't remember leaving the courthouse. One moment he was sitting at the defendant's table, staring at the empty space where his life used to be. The next moment, he was behind the wheel of his Porsche, weaving through Manhattan traffic like a man possessed. His hands shook on the steering wheel. His phone kept buzzing with notifications he couldn't bring himself to read. The radio was playing something, but he couldn't hear it over the roaring in his ears. "It's a trick," he said out loud, his voice filling the empty car. "It has to be a trick. Nobody hides being a billionaire for 20 years. Nobody." He ran a red light. A taxi honked. Marcus didn't care. He needed to get to the office. He needed to talk to Leonard Banks, his CFO. Leonard knew where the money was. Leonard knew how to move assets. Leonard could fix this. Leonard had to fix this. Marcus fumbled for his phone, nearly sideswiping a delivery truck. He found Leonard's number and hit call. "Leonard," Marcus screamed the moment the line connected. "Where are you? I need you at the office, now." "Alex." Leonard's voice sounded strange, thin, wrong. "Listen, you shouldn't come here." "What are you talking about? I own that building. I go where I please." "Marcus, listen to me." "No, you listen to me." Marcus cut across 2 lanes of traffic, earning a symphony of horns. "I need you to transfer the offshore accounts, the Caymans, the Zurich holdings. Move it all to the crypto wallets we set up. Do it now before they freeze everything." Silence on the other end. "Leonard, did you hear me?" "I can't do that, Marcus." "Why the hell not?" Leonard's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because they're already here." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone. Then he threw it against the passenger seat and floored the accelerator. The underground parking garage of Ashford Technologies was dark and quiet. Too quiet for a Wednesday afternoon. Usually there were people coming and going, executives heading to lunch meetings, assistants running errands. Today, nothing. Marcus parked crooked across 2 spaces and sprinted toward the private elevator. His elevator. The one that went directly to the executive floor. The one that only responded to his fingerprint. He pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner. Beep, beep, beep. Access denied. Marcus stared at the red light. He wiped his thumb on his jacket and tried again. Access denied. User ID invalid. No. Marcus kicked the steel doors, leaving a scuff mark on the polished surface. No, no, no. "Mr. Ashford?" Marcus spun around. 2 security guards stood behind him. Men he had hired. Men whose paychecks he signed. But they weren't smiling. They weren't deferential. They stood with their arms crossed, looking at him with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. "Open this elevator," Marcus barked. "The system is malfunctioning." "It's not a malfunction, sir." The taller guard's voice was flat. "We've been instructed to escort you to the boardroom. Visitor access only." "Visitor." Marcus's face went red. "I'm the CEO. I built this company. This way, sir." They flanked him, not touching but close enough to make their meaning clear. Marcus had no choice. He walked with them to the service elevator, the one used by maintenance staff and delivery people. The humiliation burned like acid. When the elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, Marcus barely recognized his own company. The open floor plan was silent. Hundreds of employees sat at their desks, heads down, pretending to work. But Marcus could feel their eyes on him. Sideways glances, whispered conversations that stopped when he walked past. They knew. Of course they knew. News traveled faster than light in a tech company. The glass doors of the main conference room were frosted, but Marcus could see shadows moving inside. Multiple shadows. Too many shadows for a normal meeting. He pushed past the security guards and threw the doors open. The scene stopped him cold. The long mahogany table was full, every seat occupied. The entire board of directors was present, all 12 of them. Men and women Marcus had bullied, charmed, and manipulated for years. People who used to jump when he snapped his fingers. None of them would meet his eyes. And at the head of the table in his chair sat Elena. She had changed clothes since the courthouse. Gone was the worn gray dress of a beaten housewife. She wore a tailored navy blazer, now sharp and authoritative. Her hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders. She sat in the leather executive chair like she had been sitting there her entire life. Because Marcus realized with a sickening lurch, she had been. In a way, he never understood. To Elena's right sat Richard Castellano, flipping through a stack of financial documents with an expression of mild boredom. To her left was Victoria tapping on a tablet, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. And standing in the corner, looking like he was about to vomit, was Leonard Banks. "You're in my chair," Marcus said. His voice came out weaker than he intended. "I'm in the chairman's chair," Elena corrected calmly. She didn't stand. She didn't flinch. "And since I represent the majority shareholder interest as of 2 hours ago, this is exactly where I belong. You can't just... Article 7, Section 4 of the corporate bylaws." Victoria spoke without looking up from her tablet. "In the event of a material change in ownership structure, the majority stakeholder may call an emergency board meeting and assume temporary operational control pending formal election." "I wrote those bylaws." "Yes, you did." Elena almost smiled. "You wrote them to protect yourself from hostile takeovers. You never imagined the hostile party would be your wife." Marcus slammed his hands on the table. "This is illegal. I have an employment contract. I have executive protections. I have Article 15, Section C." Victoria scrolled through her tablet. "The CEO may be removed immediately and without severance in the event of gross misconduct, criminal negligence, or actions detrimental to shareholder value." "I haven't done anything criminal." His eyes darted to Leonard, who shrank further into the corner. Elena picked up a manila folder from the table. She slid it across the polished mahogany surface until it stopped directly in front of Marcus. "Leonard told us everything." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The renovation costs for the penthouse that were billed as server infrastructure upgrades, $400,000. Elena's voice was steady, almost gentle. The company jet trips to Monaco and Saint-Tropez listed as client development, $2.3 million over 3 years. She opened the folder. The jewelry receipts for Jessica, Cartier, Tiffany, Van Cleef, all categorized as office supplies and client gifts. Elena looked up at him. "You bought your mistress a diamond bracelet and charged it to the marketing budget." Marcus turned to Leonard. "You traitor. After everything I did for you. You did nothing for me, Marcus." Leonard's voice cracked. "You threatened to destroy my career if I didn't help you cook the books. I have a family. I have kids. Mr. Castellano's auditors found the discrepancies in 10 minutes. 10 minutes to find what I spent years hiding." "They offered him immunity," Victoria added. "He took it. Smart man." Marcus grabbed the edge of the table. The room was spinning. "So what? You fire me. Big deal. I still have my shares. I own 30% of this company. You can't touch that." Richard Castellano finally looked up from his documents. He removed his reading glasses and folded them slowly. Then he fixed Marcus with a stare that had broken stronger men. "Actually, Richard said, his voice like gravel and thunder. You don't. What? 3 years ago, you took out a loan against your equity position. Do you remember that, Mr. Ashford? You needed to pay off some gambling debts in Las Vegas. Quite substantial debts. You used your shares as collateral. Marcus's heart stopped. The loan was held by a private equity firm called Centurion Capital. Richard paused. Would you like to guess who owns Centurion Capital? Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't breathe. I do. Richard smiled, and there was no warmth in it. And since you missed your last 2 margin calls too busy buying jewelry for your girlfriend, I suppose I foreclosed on the collateral this morning. He set down his glasses. Your shares belong to me now, every single one. Marcus stumbled backward. He caught himself on a chair, gripping it to stay upright. This is a setup. You planned this. You waited 20 years to trap me. No. Elena stood up. She walked around the table slowly, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I waited 20 years for you to be the man I thought you were. I covered for you, Marcus. When I noticed discrepancies in the finances 5 years ago, I used dividends from my trust to plug the holes. She stopped directly in front of him. I told myself you were just stressed. You were just going through a phase. The man I married, the man who used to stay up all night talking to me about his dreams, I thought he was still in there somewhere. Her voice wavered for just a moment. Then you looked at me across the breakfast table last month and told me I was dead weight. You told me I was holding you back. You told me I was nothing. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. 20 years, Marcus. I gave you 20 years of my life. I gave you children. I gave you my family's money. I gave you everything I had. Elena's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. And you repaid me by throwing papers in my face in a courthouse hallway. She turned away from him. I call for a vote to remove Marcus Ashford as CEO, effective immediately, pending a criminal investigation into embezzlement and fraud. Seconded, said a board member at the far end of the table. David Chen. Marcus had thought David was his ally. All in favor. 12 hands went up, every single one. Even Leonard in the corner raised a trembling hand. Motion carried. Elena didn't look back. Security, please escort Mr. Ashford off the premises. He is not to remove any items from his office. His personal effects will be boxed and shipped to wherever he ends up. The 2 guards from the parking garage appeared at Marcus's elbows. Elena, wait. Marcus's voice cracked. The arrogance was gone now, replaced by something that sounded almost like genuine panic. Please, we can talk about this. I made mistakes. I know I made mistakes. But I can fix them. Give me another chance. I love you. Elena turned around. For a moment, Marcus saw a flash of the woman who had laughed at his jokes 20 years ago. The woman who had believed in him when nobody else did. The woman who had held his hand during his father's funeral and told him everything would be okay. Then the steel doors slammed shut in her eyes. You don't love me, Marcus. You never did. Her voice was cold now, final. You loved the idea that you were better than me. You loved having someone to look down on. You loved feeling powerful. She glanced at the guards. Get him out of here. You can't do this to me, Marcus screamed as the guards grabbed his arms. I'm Marcus Ashford. I'm somebody. You're nothing. You were nothing before me, and you'll be nothing after. Elena sat back down in the CEO's chair. She straightened a stack of papers on the desk. She didn't watch him go. Actually, Marcus, Victoria called out as he was dragged toward the door. There's one more thing. Marcus struggled against the guards, turning to look at her. Victoria held up her phone. The SEC would like to speak with you. Something about securities fraud. They're waiting in the lobby. The doors closed on Marcus's screams. The boardroom was quiet for a long moment. Then Elena let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 20 years. Are you okay? Richard reached over and touched his daughter's hand. I will be. Elena looked at the closed doors. I didn't want it to end like this, Dad. I really didn't. I know, sweetheart. I wanted to be wrong about him. I wanted him to be the man I thought he was. Victoria set down her tablet. Some people show you who they are slowly, Elena. Others show you all at once. Marcus just took his time. Elena nodded. She looked around the boardroom at the faces of the board members who had just voted to destroy her husband's career. Most of them looked uncomfortable. A few looked relieved. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena said, her voice growing stronger. I know this has been a difficult day, but Ashford Technologies has a future, a good future. We have strong fundamentals, talented employees, and products that people actually want. She stood up. My father's company will be conducting a full audit over the next 2 weeks. Any evidence of fraud or misconduct will be referred to the appropriate authorities. But I want to make something clear. She looked at each board member in turn. This company is not going to be dismantled or sold off for parts. I didn't spend 20 years watching Marcus build this just to tear it down. We're going to clean house and then we're going to grow. David Chen cleared his throat. Mrs. Ashford. Castellano. Elena corrected gently. It's Castellano now. Mrs. Castellano. What about the employees? They're terrified. Half of them think they're going to be fired by the end of the week. Then let's reassure them. Elena walked toward the glass doors. Victoria, can you draft an all-hands communication? No layoffs. Business as usual. Anyone who had knowledge of Marcus's fraud will be investigated, but we're not conducting a witch hunt. Victoria nodded, already typing. Dad, how quickly can your team complete the audit? Richard smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had shown all day. For you, sweetheart, 2 weeks. Maybe less if I bring in the Singapore team. Do it. Elena pushed open the glass doors and looked out at the silent office floor. Hundreds of faces stared back at her. She raised her voice so they could all hear. My name is Elena Castellano. Most of you know me as Marcus Ashford's wife, the quiet woman who showed up at Christmas parties and smiled for photographs. She paused. That woman is gone. I'm the majority shareholder of this company now, and I'm going to need all of your help to make sure it survives what's coming. We have a lot of work to do. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Let's get started. The office erupted into uncertain applause. A few people even stood up. Elena could see tears on some faces, relief on others. Behind her, Victoria leaned over to Richard. She's good at this. Richard nodded, watching his daughter walk across the office floor, stopping to shake hands to offer words of encouragement, to be exactly what these terrified people needed. She always was. She just never had the chance to show it. 2 floors below, in the marble lobby of Ashford Technologies, Marcus Ashford was being led out in handcuffs. The SEC agents were professional but firm. They had a warrant. They had questions. They had apparently been building a case for months. Marcus walked past the security desk, past the reception area, past the massive portrait of himself that hung in the lobby. Tomorrow he knew that portrait would be gone. And so would everything else. Mr. Ashford, one of the agents said as they pushed through the revolving doors into the harsh afternoon sunlight. You have the right to remain silent. Marcus didn't hear the rest. He was staring up at the 40th floor, trying to see through the windows. Somewhere up there, Elena was sitting in his chair. His empire. His throne. The agents pushed him into the back of a black SUV. Where are we going? Marcus asked, his voice hollow. Federal Plaza. You're going to want to call a lawyer. Marcus almost laughed. He had no money for lawyers now. He had no money for anything. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, Marcus Ashford watched his building get smaller and smaller in the rear window. 20 years of work. 20 years of ambition. 20 years of climbing over everyone who got in his way. And it had all been built on the money of a woman he never bothered to truly know. The SUV turned a corner and the building disappeared from view. Marcus closed his eyes. The worst part, he realized, wasn't the handcuffs. It wasn't the fraud charges. It wasn't even the loss of his company. The worst part was that Elena had known. She had known for years what he was doing, who he was becoming. And she had loved him anyway. She had protected him. She had given him chance after chance after chance. And he had thrown it all away for Jessica, for gambling, for the pathetic thrill of feeling superior to the woman who had been carrying him all along. The SEC agent's phone buzzed. Yeah, we got him. We're headed to Federal now. A pause. Really? Already? That was fast. The agent ended the call and glanced back at Marcus. What? Marcus asked. Your girlfriend, Jessica Morgan. The agent shrugged. She's cooperating with investigators. Apparently, she has a lot of text messages and voicemails she'd like to share. Marcus felt the last flicker of hope die in his chest. Of course she does. The SUV merged onto the highway heading toward federal custody. Behind them, in the gleaming tower that bore his name, Elena Castellano was building something new, something better, something that would last. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the 40th floor as Elena finished her first meeting as interim CEO. That went well, Victoria said, gathering her papers. Did it? I couldn't tell. Elena rubbed her temples. I've never fired anyone before. Firing 50 people feels necessary, Richard supplied. He was still sitting at the conference table watching his daughter with something that looked like pride. Everyone who helped Marcus cover up the fraud had to go. You know that. I know. It doesn't make it easier. Nothing worth doing is easy, sweetheart. You used to say that when you were 10 years old. Elena smiled despite herself. I was a precocious child. You were. You also used to say you wanted to run a company one day. Be your own boss. Make something important. And then I met Marcus. Elena sighed. And I decided love was more important than ambition. Richard stood up and walked to his daughter. He put his hands on her shoulders. You didn't make the wrong choice, Elena. You made a choice. It didn't work out the way you hoped. That doesn't make you a fool. It makes you human. I feel like a fool. You feel like a woman who just took over a billion-dollar company in the span of 3 hours. Richard smiled. Give yourself some credit. Most hostile takeovers take months. Victoria checked her phone. Speaking of hostile, Marcus's arraignment is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The prosecutor's office is pushing for no bail. Will they get it? Probably not. Flight risk is high, but he has no resources. No passport. We had his lawyer surrender it this afternoon. No friends willing to post bond. Victoria shrugged. He'll probably spend a night or two at Rikers before someone takes pity on him. Elena turned to look out the window at the Manhattan skyline. Part of me feels like I should help him. Victoria nearly dropped her phone. Excuse me. He was my husband for 20 years, Vic. He's the father of my children. I know he's terrible. I know he did terrible things. But watching him get dragged out of here in handcuffs is exactly what he deserves, Victoria finished firmly. Elena, this man stole from you. He cheated on you. He was planning to leave you homeless and destroy your reputation with fake evidence. The only reason you're not the one in handcuffs right now is because we got here in time. I know. He doesn't deserve your pity. Elena turned back to her sister. Maybe not, but I'm not sure I can just turn off 20 years of caring about someone. Richard and Victoria exchanged a look. Give it time, Richard said gently. The man you cared about never really existed. You were in love with a mask. The real Marcus has been hiding underneath this whole time. Elena nodded slowly. I know, it's just hard. It's supposed to be hard. Richard picked up his cane. That's how you know you're not like him. That's how you know you have a heart. He walked toward the door, then paused. I'm proud of you, Elena. Your mother would have been proud too. Elena's eyes glistened. Thanks, Dad. After Richard left, Victoria started packing up her briefcase. "You should go home," Victoria said. "Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be crazy." "Home." Elena laughed bitterly. "Where is that exactly?" "The penthouse belongs to me technically, but I don't think I can sleep there. Too many memories. The family house in Connecticut is open, or I can book you a suite at the Carlisle." "The Carlisle sounds good, at least for tonight." Victoria nodded. "I'll have someone bring your things from the penthouse, just clothes and personal items. Everything else can wait." "Thanks, Vic." Victoria paused at the door. "Elena, you did good today. Really good. Don't let anyone make you feel bad for standing up for yourself." Then she was gone, and Elena was alone in the boardroom. She walked to the window and looked down at the city below. Millions of people all living their lives completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded 40 floors above them. Her phone buzzed. A text from her son, Michael. "Mom, I saw the news. Are you okay? Should I come home?" Elena typed back. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine. We'll talk tomorrow. I love you." Another text, this one from her daughter, Sarah. "Holy shit, Mom, you're a badass. Call me when you can." Elena laughed out loud. Her daughter had always been the dramatic one. She put the phone away and took one last look around the boardroom. Marcus had designed this room himself. The mahogany table, the leather chairs, the ridiculous abstract painting on the wall that had cost $100,000. Tomorrow, Elena decided she would redecorate. But for now, she just wanted a hot bath and a glass of wine and maybe 8 hours of sleep. She walked out of the boardroom, turned off the lights, and closed the door behind her. The office floor was quiet now. Most of the employees had gone home. A few stragglers were still at their desks working late, or perhaps just too stunned to leave. Elena nodded to them as she walked past. A few nodded back. One young woman, barely out of college, looked up at her with something like awe. "Mrs. Castellano?" the young woman called out. Elena stopped. "Yes. I just wanted to say thank you. A lot of us were really scared. About our jobs, about what would happen. But you made us feel like it's going to be okay." Elena smiled. "It is going to be okay. I promise." The young woman beamed. "Welcome to Ashford Technologies. I mean, whatever it's going to be called now." Elena hadn't thought about that. The company bore Marcus's name. Every sign, every letterhead, every email signature. That would have to change too. "We'll figure it out," Elena said. "Have a good night." She took the elevator down to the lobby. The portrait of Marcus was still there, looming over the reception desk. "Take that down tonight," Elena told the security guard. "Put it in storage somewhere." "Yes, ma'am." She walked out into the cold evening air. A limousine was waiting for her, courtesy of Victoria. The driver held the door open. "The Carlisle, Mrs. Castellano?" "Yes, thank you." Elena slid into the back seat and leaned her head against the leather. The car pulled away from the building, and Elena watched it recede through the window. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. But tonight, for the first time in 20 years, she was free. And that was enough. Rikers Island was nothing like the penthouse on Park Avenue. Marcus Ashford had spent 2 nights in federal holding, sleeping on a thin mattress that smelled like despair, surrounded by men who looked at his soft hands and expensive haircut like he was prey. When he finally made bail, posted by a gambling buddy from Atlantic City who charged 40% interest, Marcus emerged into the sunlight, looking like a different person. His bespoke suit was wrinkled beyond repair. His stubble had grown into an uneven gray beard. His eyes were bloodshot hollow, the eyes of a man who had stared at a concrete ceiling for 48 hours and seen his entire life crumbling on that ceiling like a bad movie. The Uber driver who picked him up kept glancing in the rearview mirror, clearly recognizing him from the news, but too polite to say anything. "Where to?" the driver asked. Marcus gave him the address of a motel in Queens. Not a hotel, a motel, the kind with weekly rates and no questions asked. the kind for people who had nowhere else to go. Marcus checked into room 147. The carpet was stained, the bedspread was questionable, and the TV only got 12 channels. But it had a lock on the door and a phone that worked, and right now that was all Marcus needed. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone. 63 missed calls, 217 text messages. Most of them from reporters, lawyers, former colleagues. A few from numbers he didn't recognize. Nothing from Jessica. Nothing from his children. Nothing from anyone who actually mattered. Marcus scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Gary Finkel, a lawyer whose office was above a laundromat in Hell's Kitchen, whose face was on bus bench advertisements promising aggressive representation for regular people. Not exactly Arthur Blackwood, but Arthur wouldn't return his calls, and even if he did, Marcus couldn't afford him anymore. Finkel Law Office. The voice that answered sounded like it had been marinated in cigarettes and cheap coffee. I need to speak with Gary Finkel. This is Marcus Ashford. A pause. Then, the Marcus Ashford. From the news. Yes. Hold, please. 30 seconds later, a different voice came on the line. Higher, more nasal, with the practiced enthusiasm of a man who smelled opportunity. Mr. Ashford, Gary Finkel here. I saw your situation on the news. Terrible stuff. Terrible. How can I help? I need a lawyer. Well, you called the right guy. I specialize in high-profile cases. Just last month I got a city councilman off on corruption charges. Well, mostly off. Reduced sentence anyway. Marcus closed his eyes. This was his life now. Reduced sentences and bus bench lawyers. Can you come to Queens? I'm at the Starlight Motel on Northern Boulevard. Queens, Gary's voice wavered. That's kind of far from my office. I'll pay you $500 in cash just to show up. I'll be there in an hour. Gary Finkel arrived in exactly 57 minutes. He was a small man with a comb-over that fooled no one and a suit that was 2 sizes too big. He carried a battered briefcase that looked like it had been through multiple wars. But his eyes were sharp. Marcus noticed that immediately. Behind the cheap suit and the bus bench ads was a man who knew how to survive. So, Gary said, settling into the room's only chair while Marcus sat on the bed. Let's talk about your options. What options? They have evidence. They have witnesses. They have my own CFO turning state's evidence against me. True. Gary pulled out a yellow legal pad. But they also have a narrative problem. What do you mean? Gary leaned forward, his eyes glinting. Mr. Ashford, you're not just a man accused of fraud. You're a man who was married to a secret billionaire for 20 years. A woman who hid her identity manipulated you into building a company with her money and then swooped in to destroy you when she got bored. Marcus blinked. That's exactly how we're going to spin it. Gary grinned. The public loves an underdog story. Right now you're the villain. But with the right PR campaign, you could be the victim. The victim? Think about it. You married a woman named Elena James from a small town in Oregon. She told you she was estranged from her family. She let you believe she was poor, that she needed you. And all along she was sitting on billions. Billions, Mr. Ashford. She was testing you, playing games with your life. Marcus felt something stir in his chest. Hope no. Something darker. The old familiar feeling of finding an angle, an escape route, a way to turn the tables. You're saying I could flip the narrative. I'm saying the Castellanos are old money, East Coast elites, the kind of people regular Americans love to hate. Gary spread his hands. You're a guy from Queens who built a tech company, the American dream, and she crushed you because you didn't pass her sick little test. Marcus stood up and walked to the window. Through the grimy glass, he could see the parking lot, the highway, the gray New York sky. What would this look like? Media blitz, sympathetic interviews, morning shows, cable news, maybe a podcast or two. We get ahead of the fraud charges by painting you as a desperate man who is trying to save his company from a hostile takeover. Gary pulled out a tablet. I've already drafted some talking points. You work fast. I saw opportunity. Gary shrugged. That's what I do. Marcus took the tablet and scrolled through the document. The language was polished emotional, designed to tug at heartstrings. I thought I married the love of my life. I didn't know I married my executioner. For 20 years, I worked myself to the bone while she sat on a fortune and watched me suffer. The Castellanos don't just have money, they have power, and they'll destroy anyone who doesn't play by their rules. Marcus smiled for the first time in days. When do we start? 3 days later, Marcus Ashford sat across from Jennifer Walsh, the host of Morning America, one of the most watched breakfast shows in the country. He wore a simple sweater, no tie, looking humble and broken. His hair was neatly combed, but not styled. His hands were folded in his lap. He had practiced this posture for hours in front of Gary's bathroom mirror. Marcus, Jennifer said, her voice dripping with sympathy. America wants to know, how are you holding up? Marcus let out a shaky breath. It wasn't entirely fake. The stress of the past week had taken a genuine toll. It's been the hardest week of my life, Jennifer. I lost my company. I lost my home. I lost my wife. And I'm facing charges for things I didn't do. Walk us through what happened, from your perspective. Marcus looked directly into the camera. 20 years ago, I met a woman named Elena James. She was kind. She was smart. She told me she was from a small town in Oregon, that she was estranged from her family because they were difficult. He paused, letting the silence build. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? I loved her. And you had no idea about her real identity? None. Marcus shook his head. Not until she ambushed me in that courtroom. Can you imagine, Jennifer, 20 years of marriage and I never knew my wife was a billionaire? She watched me struggle to build my company. She watched me work 18-hour days. She watched me develop health problems from stress. And she could have helped at any time. Jennifer leaned in. Why do you think she hid it? She told me she wanted to see if someone could love her for her, not her money. Marcus let his voice crack slightly. But that's not love, Jennifer. That's manipulation. That's treating your husband like a lab rat in some twisted experiment. What about the fraud charges? Marcus had prepared for this question. I moved company funds, yes. But I did it because I suspected something was wrong. The finances didn't add up. I thought we were being targeted for a hostile takeover. I was trying to protect my employees, my investors, my family. He wiped at his eye. I didn't know the threat was coming from inside my own home. And the other women? The allegations of infidelity. Marcus looked down at his hands. I'm not proud of everything I've done, Jennifer. My marriage was falling apart. Elena was cold distant. I made mistakes. But those mistakes don't make me a criminal. They make me human. Jennifer nodded sympathetically. Some people are calling you a victim in all this. Do you see yourself that way? I see myself as a man who was used. The Castellanos are one of the most powerful families in America. They own media companies shipping lines politicians. And they decided to make an example of me because I didn't live up to their impossible standards. He looked back at the camera. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for fairness. Let me have my day in court. Let me tell my side of the story. Because right now the Castellanos control the narrative, and that's not justice, that's just power. The interview went viral within hours. By noon, the hashtag #JusticeForMarcus was trending on Twitter. By evening, it had spawned a GoFundMe for his legal fees that had raised over $50,000 from sympathetic strangers. Internet sleuths began digging into the Castellano family history, finding old articles about business rivals who had mysteriously gone bankrupt, politicians who had changed their votes after meeting with Richard Castellano, journalists who had been quietly reassigned after writing unflattering stories. The narrative shifted. Marcus wasn't the cheating embezzler anymore. He was the little guy who had been crushed by the machine. In the penthouse suite of the Carlisle Hotel, Elena watched the interview with her jaw clenched. "Turn it off," she said. Victoria grabbed the remote. "Elena, turn it off." The screen went black. Elena stood up and walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. "He's lying. Every word. He's lying, and people are believing it." "It's a good performance," Victoria admitted. "Gary Finkel knows what he's doing. This is straight out of the playbook. When you can't win on facts, win on feelings." "Our stock dropped 3 points this morning." Elena turned around. "The board is getting calls from investors asking if the company is stable. Our PR team has received 400 media requests in the last 6 hours, all of them wanting to know if I entrapped my husband." Richard Castellano set down his newspaper. He had been reading quietly in the corner, seemingly unperturbed by the chaos on the television. "Let him talk," Richard said calmly. Elena stared at him. "What?" "Let him build his tower, sweetheart. Let him think he's winning." "Dad, he's destroying our reputation. He's destroying a story." Richard stood up and walked to his daughter. "Stories can be changed. Reputations can be rebuilt. But truth?" He tapped his cane against the floor. "Truth is forever, and we have the truth." "The truth doesn't matter if nobody believes it." "Then we'll make them believe." Richard looked at Victoria. "How quickly can you arrange a deposition?" Victoria frowned. "We were planning to wait until the criminal trial." "Change of plans. I want Marcus under oath, on camera, next week." "Dad, that's aggressive. If it backfires." "It won't backfire." Richard turned to Elena. "You lived with this man for 20 years. You know his secrets. Not just the financial ones. The real ones." Elena was quiet for a long moment. "There's a recording," she finally said. Victoria and Richard both looked at her. "What recording?" Victoria asked. "His cloud storage. He's had the same password for years. Password 123 if you can believe it." Elena laughed bitterly. "I've had access to his accounts for a decade. I never looked. I didn't want to know." She sat down on the couch. "But after he started the affair with Jessica, I couldn't help myself. I logged in one night while he was sleeping, and I found everything." "Define everything," Victoria said carefully. "Voice memos, emails, text messages." Elena's voice hardened. "He recorded himself, Vic. He actually recorded himself bragging about the things he was doing, like he was keeping a trophy collection." Richard's eyes gleamed. "And you have access to this?" "It's company property. The phone was paid for by Ashford Technologies. The cloud storage is on company servers." Elena looked at her father. "It all belongs to me now." Victoria was already pulling out her phone. "I can have a forensic team authenticate the files within 24 hours. If they're legitimate, they're legitimate." Elena stood up. "He thought he was so smart, Dad. He thought I was so stupid. But I watched. I listened. I learned." She walked to the window and looked out at the city. "He wants a public fight, fine. We'll give him one. But we're doing it my way." "What do you mean?" Victoria asked. Elena turned around. "The deposition. Make it public. Live streamed. If Marcus wants transparency, let's give it to him." Richard smiled. It was the smile of a lion watching its prey walk into a trap. "That's my girl." The deposition was scheduled for the following week at a conference room in the Four Seasons Hotel. Because of the intense media interest Marcus had generated, the judge had agreed to an unusual request. Portions of the testimony would be released to the press in real time, ostensibly to ensure transparency, given the high-profile nature of the accusations. Marcus walked in feeling like a king. The GoFundMe had crossed $100,000. His Twitter followers had tripled. 3 publishers had reached out about a book deal. Gary Finkel was already negotiating with reality TV producers about a documentary. The public was on his side. The narrative was set. All he had to do was stick to the script. Elena sat across from him at the long conference table. She was flanked by Victoria and Robert Graves, one of her father's senior attorneys. She looked calm, too calm. Marcus didn't let it worry him. She was probably just trying to intimidate him. Mr. Ashford. Robert Graves shuffled his papers. You understand this deposition is being recorded, and portions may be released to the media. I understand. Marcus leaned back in his chair, projecting confidence. I have nothing to hide. Excellent. Let's begin. Graves turned on a tablet connected to a large monitor on the wall. You have stated publicly that you were unaware of your wife's family wealth and that you moved company funds only to protect the assets from what you perceived as an external threat. Is that correct? That's correct. I was trying to save the company. And you claim you were a faithful, loving husband who was emotionally manipulated by your wife's deception. Absolutely. I loved Elena. I would have done anything for her. Elena didn't react. She just watched him, her eyes unreadable. Marcus felt a flicker of unease, but pushed it away. Mr. Ashford, Graves continued, we'd like to introduce some evidence into the record. Exhibit A. He slid a USB drive across the table to the stenographer. Gary Finkel frowned. We weren't notified of digital evidence. It was obtained yesterday. Elena spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. From the cloud server of your personal phone, Marcus. You really should have changed your password after I left. Password 123 isn't exactly secure. Marcus felt his stomach drop. That's an invasion of privacy. It's company property, Elena corrected. The phone was paid for by Ashford Technologies. The data belongs to me. Graves plugged the drive into the laptop. Let's play File Voice Memo July 12. The room filled with static. Then Marcus's voice rang out clear as a bell. He wasn't talking to Elena. He was talking to Jessica. I tell you, Jess, it's almost too easy. The dumb cow doesn't suspect a thing. I just signed the transfer for another $1 million. I'm gonna bleed this company dry, declare bankruptcy, and leave Elena with all the debt. She's so desperate for my approval, she'll sign anything I put in front of her. Marcus's face went white. And then what, baby? Jessica's voice playful and conspiratorial. Then I dump her and we disappear. Monaco, maybe. Or the Maldives. Somewhere without extradition. Jessica laughed. You're so bad. I'm so smart. There's a difference. The recording stopped. The silence in the room was absolute. Gary Finkel's pen had stopped moving. The stenographer had stopped typing. Even the security camera in the corner seemed to be staring at Marcus in disbelief. That's... Marcus's voice cracked. That's not real. That's a deep fake. AI generated. You can't... It's been authenticated by 3 independent forensic data firms. Victoria slid a stack of documents across the table. Digital fingerprinting confirms the file was created on July 12th of last year on a device registered to Marcus Ashford and stored on cloud servers accessed by your personal password. Marcus grabbed the edge of the table. This is entrapment. It's evidence. Elena's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. Shall we play more, Marcus? Because I have dozens, hundreds, every late-night conversation with Jessica. Every bragging session with your gambling buddies. Every time you called me stupid or useless or dead weight. She leaned forward. You recorded yourself, Marcus. You kept trophies. Did you think I would never find them? Marcus looked at Gary Finkel. The lawyer was packing up his briefcase. What are you doing? Marcus demanded. I'm resigning as counsel. Gary stood up. I don't represent perjurers. You told me you were innocent. I am innocent. You just admitted on a recording that you were planning to commit fraud and flee the country. Gary headed for the door. Good luck, Mr. Ashford. You're going to need it. The door closed behind him. Marcus was alone. Truly alone. Elena stood up. She walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of him. The cameras were still rolling, The whole world was watching. You wanted to leave me with the debt, Marcus. Do you remember that? You wanted to make me responsible for all the money you stole. Marcus couldn't speak. Well, here's the twist you didn't see coming. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. There's a clause in the corporate bylaws. A clause you wrote yourself 5 years ago to protect yourself from liability. She smiled. Article 12, Section 7. Any officer found guilty of fraud is personally liable for all company debts. Not the company, the individual. Marcus felt the blood leave his head. Ashford Technologies is currently in debt to V Group Holdings for $42 million. Infrastructure loans, expansion financing, operating capital. Elena straightened up. Since you're the one who committed the fraud, that debt isn't the company's anymore. She leaned in close. It's yours. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. You will go to prison, Marcus. And when you get out, you will spend the rest of your life working to pay me back. Every paycheck, every dime, every penny you earn for the rest of your miserable existence. Elena turned to walk away, then stopped. You're not just broke, Marcus. You're owned. By me. She walked out of the conference room without looking back. Victoria followed, then Robert Graves, then the forensic experts and the stenographer. Marcus sat alone at the long conference table, surrounded by empty chairs and the soft hum of the recording equipment. Somewhere outside he could hear reporters shouting questions, cameras clicking, the chaos of a media-feeding frenzy. But in the conference room, there was only silence. And the slow, crushing weight of a life falling apart. Marcus put his head on the table and began to sob. It wasn't the fake crying from the television interview. It wasn't a performance. It was the sound of a man who had finally realized that he had destroyed himself, and there was no one left to blame but the face in the mirror. The face he couldn't bear to look at anymore. 6 months passed like a slow-motion car crash. Marcus Ashford watched his life disintegrate piece by piece, day by day, headline by headline. The viral interview that had made him a folk hero became a punchline overnight. The GoFundMe donors demanded refunds. The book publishers stopped returning calls. The reality TV producers vanished like smoke. The recording destroyed everything. It played on every news channel, every podcast, every late-night comedy show. Marcus's own voice bragging about bleeding the company dry, calling Elena a dumb cow, planning to flee to Monaco with his mistress. There was no spinning that. There was no narrative that could survive it. The hashtag changed from Justice for Marcus to Marcus Exposed to Dumb Cow, which became a meme featuring his face photoshopped onto various farm animals. College students made TikToks lip-syncing his most damning quotes. A comedian on Saturday Night Live did an entire sketch about him that ended with the actor being dragged off stage in handcuffs while screaming about being a victim. Marcus stopped watching television after that. He stopped going outside too. The motel in Queens had become a prison of his own making. The room smelled like stale coffee and desperation. The walls were closing in. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw a stranger staring back. His children had stopped responding to his messages. Michael, his son, had sent one final text. I saw what you said about Mom. Don't contact me again. Sarah. His daughter hadn't even bothered with that much. She just blocked his number. And Jessica. Jessica had given a tell-all interview to Vanity Fair, complete with screenshots of their text messages and a detailed account of every gift he had bought her with company money. She called him pathetic and delusional and said she had only stayed with him because he was rich. The moment I found out he was broke, Jessica told the interviewer, I was out the door. I have standards. Marcus had thrown his phone against the wall after reading that. The screen cracked, but he couldn't afford to replace it. He couldn't afford anything anymore. The criminal trial had been swift and merciless. The prosecution had evidence, witnesses, and Marcus's own recordings painting a picture of systematic fraud over 5 years. His court-appointed lawyer did what she could, but there was no defense against the defendant's own voice confessing to everything. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on 3 counts of wire fraud. guilty on 2 counts of embezzlement, guilty on 1 count of perjury for lying during his deposition. When the verdict was read, Marcus didn't react. He just sat there staring at the table, feeling nothing. The numbness had set in weeks ago and hadn't lifted since. Now it was sentencing day. Marcus stood before Judge Brennan in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious spectators, and a few people who just wanted to see a rich man brought low. Elena sat in the gallery wearing a simple white dress. She looked healthy, rested, at peace. Marcus couldn't look at her for more than a second. "Alexander Marcus Ashford," Judge Brennan said, adjusting his glasses. "You have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and perjury. Before I pass sentence, is there anything you wish to say?" Marcus's lawyer nudged him. He was supposed to apologize, to show remorse, to beg for mercy. But when he opened his mouth, the words that came out surprised even him. "I had everything." His voice was hoarse from disuse. He hadn't spoken to anyone in days. "I had a wife who loved me, children who respected me, a company that was growing, a future." He shook his head slowly. "And I threw it all away because I was greedy, because I was arrogant, because I thought I was smarter than everyone else." He looked up at the judge. "I'm not asking for mercy, Your Honor. I don't deserve it. I'm just trying to understand how I became this person. When did I stop being the man who stayed up all night working on business plans with his wife? When did I start being the man who called her a dumb cow behind her back?" His voice cracked. "I don't know. And that terrifies me more than prison ever could." The courtroom was silent. Judge Brennan studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Ashford, I've been on this bench for 32 years. I've seen every kind of criminal you can imagine. Murderers, rapists, con men, thieves. But you know what I've learned?" Marcus shook his head. "The most dangerous criminals aren't the ones who don't know right from wrong. They're the ones who know and choose wrong anyway." The judge leaned forward. "You knew what you were doing was wrong. You knew you were hurting people. And you did it anyway because you thought you would never get caught." "I know. The prosecution has recommended the maximum sentence, 15 years. Judge Brennan paused. "Given the severity of the crimes, the breach of trust, and the complete lack of remorse you showed until you were caught, I see no reason to deviate from that recommendation." Marcus closed his eyes. "Marcus Ashford, I hereby sentence you to 15 years in federal prison." The gavel came down like a coffin lid. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "restitution is set at $42 million payable to Castellano Holdings and the victims of your fraud. Your assets have already been liquidated, yielding approximately $3 million. The remainder will be garnished from any future earnings until the debt is satisfied. $42 million. Even working every day for the rest of his life, Marcus would never pay it off." "Do you have anything else to say, Mr. Ashford?" Marcus opened his eyes. He looked at the judge, then at the prosecutors, then at the reporters scribbling in their notebooks. Finally, he looked at Elena. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Not anger, not triumph. Something else. Something that looked almost like sadness. "Elena." She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air. "I know that doesn't mean anything. I know sorry doesn't fix what I did. But I need you to know." His voice broke completely. "I need you to know that I remember who we were, in the beginning, before everything went wrong." Tears were streaming down his face now, and he didn't bother wiping them away. "I remember staying up until 3 a.m. working on pitch decks together. I remember you bringing me soup when I was sick. I remember dancing in the kitchen to old songs on the radio. I remember thinking I was the luckiest man in the world." He took a shuddering breath. "I don't know when I stopped seeing you. I don't know when you became invisible to me. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that you were the best thing that ever happened to me." The courtroom was absolutely still. "I'm sorry I forgot. I'm sorry I made you feel small. I'm sorry I wasted 20 years of your life." Marcus's shoulders shook. "I'm sorry I wasn't the man you thought I was. I'm sorry I wasn't the man I thought I was." He looked at the floor. "That's all I wanted to say." Judge Brennan nodded to the bailiffs. "Take him into custody." As the officers moved forward to escort Marcus out, Elena stood up. "Wait." Everyone froze. Elena walked to the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. She stopped directly in front of Marcus, close enough to touch. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. 20 years of marriage. 20 years of shared meals and shared beds and shared dreams that had curdled into nightmares. "Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding day?" Elena asked quietly. Marcus knotted his throat too tight to speak. "You said I was your safe harbor. You said that no matter how stormy life got, you would always come home to me." "I remember." "I believed you, Marcus. For 20 years I believed you." She reached up and touched his cheek. Her fingers were warm against his skin. "Part of me will always love the man I thought you were. The man who used to hold my hand during scary movies and pretend he wasn't scared too. The man who cried when our children were born." Her voice wavered. "But that man disappeared a long time ago, and I don't think he's coming back." Marcus couldn't speak. He just stood there, tears running down his face, feeling the warmth of her hand against his cheek. "I forgive you, Marcus." He looked up sharply. "Not for your sake. For mine." Elena dropped her hand. "I refuse to spend the rest of my life carrying anger. I refuse to let what you did define who I become." She took a step back. "But forgiving you doesn't mean I'll forget. And it doesn't mean I'll visit. And it doesn't mean I'll be waiting when you get out." Marcus nodded. He understood. It was more than he deserved. "Elena, yes. Will you tell the kids that I'm sorry, that I love them, that I know I failed them?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "I'll tell them you asked. What they do with that is up to them." She turned and walked back to her seat in the gallery. Victoria put an arm around her shoulders. The bailiffs took Marcus's arms. "Time to go, Mr. Ashford." Marcus took one last look at Elena. She was talking quietly with her sister, not watching him anymore. She had moved on. It was time for him to do the same. The federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania was nothing like the Manhattan penthouses Marcus used to call home. His cell was 8 feet by 10 feet. He shared it with a man named Jerome, who had been convicted of tax fraud and who snored like a freight train. The food was terrible. The showers were cold. The guards looked at him like he was a number instead of a person, which technically he was now. Inmate 847291. The first few weeks were the hardest. Marcus had never been alone with his thoughts before. He had always had distractions: work, women, expensive toys, ways to avoid looking too closely at who he had become. Now there was nothing but time. He thought about Elena constantly. Not the Elena from the courtroom, powerful and poised in her white dress. The Elena from before. The young woman with the easy laugh who had agreed to marry him even though she was worth billions and he was worth nothing. She had seen something in him. Something good. Something worth betting on. When had that thing died? Marcus traced it back year by year, trying to find the moment when he had started becoming a monster. Was it when the company started succeeding and he began believing his own hype? Was it when he met the first of many Jessicas and discovered that infidelity was easy when you were rich? Was it when he started resenting Elena's quiet competence, her gentle suggestions that felt like criticism? Or was it earlier than that? Had there always been something broken inside him? Something that was just waiting for the right circumstances to reveal itself? He didn't know, and not knowing was its own kind of prison. 3 months in, Marcus received a letter. It was from his son, Michael. Marcus's hands shook as he opened it. He had written to both of his children every week since his incarceration. Michael had never responded. Sarah had sent back one letter unopened. "Dad," the letter began, "I'm not going to pretend this is easy to write. I've started and deleted this letter about 50 times. Mom told me you asked about us. She said you wanted her to tell us you were sorry. I've been thinking about that a lot. About whether sorry means anything when it comes years too late. About whether I can forgive someone who hurt Mom the way you did. I don't have answers yet. I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. When I heard those recordings, I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. That was my father saying those things. My father who used to take me to baseball games and help me with my homework and tell me I could be anything I wanted to be. How do I reconcile that person with the person on those recordings? I don't know if I can. But here's the thing, Dad. Mom is happy now. Really happy. She's running the company and she's good at it. She laughs more than I've ever heard her laugh. She went on vacation last month, her first real vacation in 20 years. She's becoming the person she was always supposed to be. And even though I hate what you did, I can't hate the outcome. Does that make sense? I'm not ready to visit you. I don't know if I ever will be. But I'm writing back because I think you deserve to know that we're okay. Mom is okay. Sarah is still angry, but she'll get there eventually. We're not going to let what you did destroy us. I hope prison gives you time to think. I hope you figure out how you became the man on those recordings. And I hope when you get out, you try to be someone different. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not giving up either. Your son, Michael. Marcus read the letter 4 times. Then he put it under his pillow and stared at the ceiling until the lights went out. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was barely even a conversation. But it was something. A crack in the door. A sliver of light in the darkness. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus felt something besides numbness and despair. He felt hope. The next morning, Marcus signed up for the prison's education program. He enrolled in business ethics courses. He started attending group therapy sessions for white-collar criminals, listening to other men tell stories that sounded uncomfortably similar to his own. He began writing. Not letters to his children, he continued those even when they went unanswered, but a journal. An attempt to understand himself. To trace the path from the hopeful young entrepreneur who had fallen in love with a quiet woman from Oregon to the monster who had called her a dumb cow and plotted to leave her with nothing. It wasn't pretty. The things Marcus discovered about himself were ugly, uncomfortable, and sometimes unbearable. There were nights when he lay awake consumed by shame so intense it felt physical. But there were also mornings when he woke up feeling lighter, clearer, like he was finally seeing himself for the first time. 1 year into his sentence, Marcus received another letter. This one was from Elena. It was short, just a few paragraphs. Marcus, Michael told me he wrote to you. I'm glad. Whatever happened between us, you're still his father. I'm writing because I thought you should hear this from me instead of reading it in a newspaper. The board voted yesterday to officially rename the company. It's no longer Ashford Technologies. It's now Castellano Tech. I know that might be hard to hear. That company was your dream before it was anything else. But it's my company now, and I need it to have a name that represents who we are, not who we were. The other thing I wanted to tell you is that I'm dating someone. His name is James. He's a professor at Columbia. He teaches philosophy, which means he's terrible at investing and wonderful at listening. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because I think you need to know that life moves on. I've moved on. And you need to move on too. Don't waste these years, Marcus. Use them. Become someone your children can be proud of, even if you can never be someone I can be proud of again. That's all I wanted to say. Elena. Marcus folded the letter carefully and added it to the small collection under his mattress. She was dating someone. She was happy. She was building a new life without him. It hurt. Of course it hurt. Some part of him had been holding on to the fantasy that when he got out, Elena would be waiting. That they would rebuild what they had destroyed. But that was just another lie he had been telling himself. The truth was simpler and harder. He had burned that bridge himself, years before he ever got caught. He had burned it with every lie, every affair, every moment he treated his wife like an obstacle instead of a partner. Elena didn't owe him anything. Not forgiveness, not communication, not even the courtesy of this letter. The fact that she had written anyway told Marcus something important about who she was, and who he needed to become. That night, Marcus began the hardest project of his incarceration. He started writing a letter to Elena, not asking for anything, not making excuses, just trying for once in his life to be completely honest. It took him 3 months to finish. When he finally sealed the envelope and sent it off, Marcus felt something shift inside him. He didn't know if Elena would read it. He didn't know if she would respond. He didn't know if his words would mean anything to her after everything he had done. But for the first time, that wasn't the point. The point was being honest, even when it was hard. Being accountable, even when no one was watching. Being the person he should have been all along. The person Elena had believed in 20 years ago when she had agreed to marry a nobody from Queens and keep her last name a secret. The person he was finally slowly, painfully learning to become. Spring had arrived in New York. The trees along Park Avenue were blooming, their branches heavy with white and pink blossoms that drifted down like confetti. The air was warmer now, carrying the promise of new beginnings. Elena Castellano stood at the window of her corner office on the 40th floor of Castellano Tech, watching the city below. 3 years had passed since the divorce trial that had turned her life upside down. 3 years since she had walked into a courtroom as a broken woman and walked out as someone entirely new. The office had changed completely since Marcus's departure. Gone were the dark mahogany and leather that he had loved, replaced by clean lines and warm wood and floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the light. Elena had kept almost nothing from the old regime. She wanted no reminders of who she used to be. Her phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Board meeting in 10. You ready?" Elena typed back, "Always." She gathered her files and walked toward the conference room. The hallways were busy now, filled with employees who nodded and smiled as she passed. 3 years ago, these same people had watched her get dragged through the mud. They had whispered about her in break rooms and wondered if she would survive. Now they called her Ms. Castellano, with respect in their voices. The conference room was full when Elena arrived. All 12 board members were present, along with Victoria, who was serving as chief legal officer, and James, who had come to observe as Elena's guest. James caught her eye and smiled. They had been together for 2 years now, and Elena still felt a flutter in her chest when he looked at her like that. He was nothing like Marcus. Quiet where Marcus was loud, thoughtful where Marcus was impulsive. He listened more than he talked, and when he did talk, his words carried weight. He had never once tried to change her, or diminish her, or make her feel small. "Good morning, everyone." Elena took her seat at the head of the table. "Let's get started. Victoria, would you give us the quarterly update?" Victoria stood up, her tablet in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to report that Castellano Tech has exceeded projections for the 6th consecutive quarter. Revenue is up 23% year over year. Our expansion into Asian markets is ahead of schedule, and our new AI division has secured 3 major government contracts." She tapped her tablet, and a chart appeared on the screen. "Most importantly, employee satisfaction is at an all-time high. Turnover is down 40% since the leadership transition. We've been named one of Forbes' best places to work for the 2nd year running." A ripple of approval went around the table. "Additionally," Victoria continued, "I'm pleased to announce that we have officially completed the acquisition of Meridian Systems. This gives us a dominant position in the cloud computing sector and adds approximately $3 billion to our market valuation." The board members applauded. Elena allowed herself a small smile. 3 years ago, Ashford Technologies had been a company in crisis, hemorrhaging money and reputation. Now, as Castellano Tech, it was one of the most successful technology firms in the country. Elena had done that. Not her father's money, not her family name. Her. "Thank you, Victoria." Elena stood up. "I'd like to add something before we move to other business. The room fell silent. 3 years ago, I walked into this building as a stranger. Most of you didn't know who I was. Some of you probably thought I was a joke, a housewife playing at business writing my family name to a position I hadn't earned. She looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. I understood that skepticism. I would have felt the same way. But I want you to know that everything we've accomplished together, the growth, the innovation, the culture we've built, that wasn't handed to me. We earned it. All of us. She paused. I also want to announce that I've made a decision about the company's future. After considerable thought and many conversations with my family, I've decided to take Castellano Tech public. Murmurs swept through the room. The IPO is scheduled for September. Goldman Sachs will be our lead underwriter. Conservative estimates value the company at approximately $15 billion. David Chen, one of the longer-serving board members, leaned forward. Ms. Castellano, this is wonderful news. But may I ask why now the company is thriving under private ownership? Why take on the complications of being public? Elena smiled. Because I want this company to belong to more than just my family. I want employees to own shares. I want investors who believe in our mission to have a stake in our success. And honestly, she glanced at James. I want to prove something. Prove what? That a company can be profitable and ethical. That you can treat employees well and still beat your competitors. That power doesn't have to corrupt. She straightened her shoulders. Marcus believed business was a zero-sum game. Someone had to lose for someone else to win. I believe the opposite. I believe we all do better when we all do better. The board voted unanimously to proceed with the IPO. After the meeting, Elena lingered in the conference room as the others filed out. James waited for her by the window. That was quite a speech, he said. Too much. Just enough. He took her hand. Your father would be proud. Elena felt a pang at the mention of Richard. He had passed away 8 months ago peacefully in his sleep. She had been at his bedside holding his hand when he took his last breath. I miss him, she said quietly. I know. He spent his whole life building the Castellano empire. And at the end, do you know what he told me? Elena's voice wavered. He said the empire didn't matter. The money didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that I was happy. James squeezed her hand. Are you happy? Elena thought about it. Really thought about it. Yes, she said finally. I think I am. Not because of the money, or the company, or the success, but because I finally know who I am. I spent 20 years being Marcus's wife. Now I'm just Elena. Just Elena is pretty remarkable. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. I'm going to visit him today. James didn't need to ask who she meant. Are you sure that's a good idea? No, but I need to do it anyway, for closure. The federal penitentiary hadn't changed much in 3 years. Elena sat in the visiting room waiting. The plastic chair was uncomfortable, the fluorescent lights harsh. Around her, other visitors talked to inmates through plexiglass dividers, their conversations reduced to murmurs. When Marcus appeared on the other side of the glass, Elena barely recognized him. He had aged 2 decades in 3 years. His hair was completely gray now, cropped short. His face was gaunt, lined with wrinkles that hadn't been there before. But his eyes were different, too clearer somehow. Less hungry. He sat down slowly like a man who had learned patience the hard way. Elena. His voice was hoarse. I didn't think you'd actually come. Neither did I. They sat in silence for a moment, separated by glass and years, and everything that had happened between them. You look good, Marcus said finally. Happy. I am happy. I'm glad. I mean that. Elena studied him, searching for the old Marcus, the predator, the manipulator, the man who had called her a dumb cow behind her back. She couldn't find him. Michael says you've changed. Marcus nodded slowly. Michael visits once a month now. We play chess through the glass. He's better than me. Always was. He gets that from his mother. A ghost of a smile crossed Marcus's face. Yeah, he does. Sarah still won't see you. I know. Marcus's voice was heavy. I write to her anyway, every week. Maybe someday she'll read them. Maybe she won't. But I need her to know I haven't given up. Elena leaned forward slightly. Why did you want to see me, Marcus, after all this time? He was quiet for a long moment. I wanted to tell you something. Something I should have said years ago. Something I should have said every day of our marriage. Elena waited. Thank you. She blinked. Thank you. For believing in me when I was nobody. For funding my company when no one else would. For staying with me through all the hard years, the failures, the setbacks. His eyes glistened. For loving me, even when I made it impossible to love me. Marcus, I know it doesn't matter now. I know I destroyed everything, but I needed you to know that I remember what you did for me. I remember who you were, who you are. He pressed his palm against the glass. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Elena, and I was too stupid and too arrogant to see it. Elena looked at his hand on the glass, the hand that used to hold hers, the hand that used to wipe away her tears when she was sad. She didn't touch the glass. She couldn't. I read your letter, she said softly, the one you sent 2 years ago. Marcus's breath caught. You never responded. I didn't know what to say. She paused. It was honest, painfully honest. I could tell it cost you something to write it. It cost me everything, and it was still less than I owed you. Elena nodded slowly. I forgave you a long time ago, Marcus. Not because you deserved it, but because I needed to let go of the anger. It was eating me alive. I know. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, and it isn't the same as trust. She met his eyes. I will never trust you again. I can't. I know that too. So why did you want to see me? Marcus leaned back in his chair. He looked exhausted, but also somehow at peace. Because I'm getting out next month. Early release for good behavior. He held up a hand before she could speak. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not going to contact you or the kids or anyone from my old life. I just wanted you to know face to face that I'm not the same man who walked into this prison. What are you going to do? I got my GED in here, then an associate's degree. I've been teaching financial literacy classes to other inmates. He smiled slightly. Turns out I'm pretty good at explaining how not to make the mistakes I made. That's good, Marcus. There's a nonprofit in Philadelphia that helps formerly incarcerated people reintegrate into society. They offered me a job. Minimum wage, long hours, no prestige. He shrugged. It's a start. Elena felt something shift inside her. Not love that had died a long time ago, not even affection, but something like respect, something like acknowledgement that people could change even when change seemed impossible. I hope you find what you're looking for, Marcus. I already found it. He looked at her through the glass. I lost everything, Elena. My money, my company, my family, my freedom. And you know what? It was the best thing that ever happened to me. How can you say that? Because losing everything forced me to figure out who I was without all of it. And I didn't like what I found, so I had to change. Really change, not just pretend to change long enough to get what I wanted. He leaned forward. I'm 53 years old. I have maybe 20-30 years left if I'm lucky. And I'm going to spend every single one of those years trying to be worthy of the faith you had in me when we were young. Not so you'll take me back. That ship has sailed, but so I can look in the mirror and not hate what I see. Elena stood up. Goodbye, Marcus. Goodbye, Elena. He pressed his hand against the glass one more time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me the chance to say what I needed to say. She nodded once, then turned and walked away. She didn't look back. The September sun was warm on Elena's face as she stood on the balcony of the New York Stock Exchange, watching the digital ticker prepare for Castellano Tech's first day of public trading. Victoria stood beside her, along with Michael, Sarah, and James. Below them, the trading floor buzzed with anticipation. "Nervous?" Victoria asked. "Terrified," Elena admitted. "But also excited. Is that strange?" "Not at all. You're about to ring the opening bell for one of the biggest IPOs of the year. A little terror is appropriate." Sarah squeezed her mother's hand. It had taken her daughter longer to come around than Michael, but eventually she had. Now she was finishing her MBA at Wharton, determined to one day work alongside Elena at the company. "Grandpa would have loved this," Sarah said. "He would have complained about the traffic getting here," Michael added. "And then he would have cried during your speech." Elena laughed. "He would have cried before my speech. Your grandfather was secretly very sentimental." An exchange official approached them. "Ms. Castellano, we're ready for you." Elena took a deep breath. She looked at her children, at her sister, at the man she loved. They looked back at her with pride and support and love. This was her family, her real family. Not the one she had been born into, not the one she had married into, but the one she had built. "Let's do this." She walked to the podium overlooking the trading floor. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. The noise was overwhelming. Elena raised her hand and silence fell. 30 years ago, she began. "I left my family's home because I wanted to see if anyone could love me for who I was, not for what I was worth. I changed my name. I took a job as a waitress. I tried to be ordinary." She paused. "I failed. Spectacularly. Because here's what I learned, there's no such thing as ordinary. Every person has extraordinary potential inside them. Every person has gifts that the world needs. The question isn't whether you're special. The question is whether you have the courage to share your specialness with the world." The crowd was completely still. "I spent 20 years hiding who I was, shrinking myself to make someone else feel big, staying quiet when I should have spoken up, accepting treatment that I never should have tolerated." Her voice grew stronger. "But then something happened. I got pushed into a corner. I got told I was worthless. I got thrown away like garbage by someone who claimed to love me." She smiled. "And in that moment, I discovered something important. I discovered that I was stronger than I ever knew. That I had been carrying power inside me all along, just waiting for the right moment to use it." She looked out at the sea of faces. "Today, Castellano Tech becomes a public company. Today we invite the world to share in what we've built. But I want to be clear about something. This company isn't about me. It isn't about my family name or my family money. It's about every person who ever felt powerless and discovered they weren't. It's about every person who ever got knocked down and got back up. It's about everyone who ever looked at a closed door and decided to build their own door instead." She raised her hand to the bell. "This company is for the underdogs, the overlooked, the underestimated. This company is proof that the quiet ones aren't always quiet because they're weak. Sometimes they're quiet because they're waiting." Elena pulled the rope. The bell rang out across the trading floor, across New York, across the country. The crowd erupted. Victoria was crying. Michael was cheering. Sarah was taking pictures. James was watching Elena with an expression of pure love and admiration. And Elena was finally completely unapologetically herself. The stock opened at $42 a share. By the end of the day, it had climbed to $67. The IPO raised $12 billion, making it one of the most successful public offerings in recent memory. But Elena didn't care about the numbers. That evening, she stood on the roof of the Castellano Tech building watching the sun set over Manhattan. The city stretched out below her, millions of lights beginning to flicker on as darkness fell. James found her there, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "Hiding from your own party. Just taking a moment." Elena accepted the glass. "It's been quite a day." It's been quite a life." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city transform from day to night. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Marcus hadn't filed for divorce?" James asked. "If he had just kept going?" Elena considered the question. "Sometimes. I probably would have stayed with him forever. I would have kept shrinking myself, kept making excuses for his behavior, kept hoping he would change." She took a sip of champagne. "In a strange way, Marcus did me a favor. He pushed me so hard that I finally pushed back. He tried to destroy me, and instead he set me free." "That's generous of you." "It's just the truth." Elena turned to face James. "I don't hate Marcus anymore. I don't love him either. I just understand him now. He was a scared little boy who never grew up, who thought the only way to feel big was to make everyone around him feel small." She shook her head. "I spent 20 years feeling small. Now I know better. My size was never the problem. My silence was." James set down his glass and took her hands. "Elena Castellano, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. You're biased. Completely. But I'm also right." Elena laughed and let him pull her close. Below them, the city sparkled like a billion tiny diamonds. Above them, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Everything was exactly as it should be. That night, Elena wrote one final entry in the journal she had been keeping since the divorce. 3 years ago, I was a woman with no name, a shadow, a ghost. I had given everything to a man who gave nothing back, and I had convinced myself that was love. I was wrong. Love isn't sacrifice. Love isn't suffering. Love isn't making yourself smaller so someone else can feel tall. Love is being seen, really seen, for who you are, not who you pretend to be. I am Elena Castellano. I am a mother, a sister, a partner, a CEO. I am strong and vulnerable. I am powerful and gentle. I am everything I was always meant to be. And I am just getting started." She closed the journal and turned off the light. Tomorrow, there would be more meetings, more decisions, more challenges. The work of building something meaningful never really ended. But tonight, Elena slept peacefully. She had spent 20 years learning to be invisible. Now the whole world knew her name. And that was exactly how it was supposed to be. Because the quiet ones aren't weak. They're patient. They're watching. They're waiting for the moment when someone underestimates them for the last time. And when that moment comes, they don't just survive. They rise. They conquer. They reign. Elena Castellano had been thrown away like garbage by a man who thought she was nothing. She had turned that nothing into an empire, and she was never going to let anyone make her feel small again.